Okay, good morning and good afternoon if you're joining from Europe or if you're joining us from Asia here today. And a warm welcome to everyone joining us for this fourth webinar as part of the Asia-Europe Training on Science and Technology Diplomacy. My name is Linnea Regnell. If you do not know me, I work within the education department as a project executive, and I have the pleasure of being part of this initiative in the training and will be the one who will MC a little bit today before I hand over the floor to our moderator for today's discussions and session. A little bit about this webinar before we kick off. This webinar series is designed primarily for eager, new and early career diplomats and government officials, scientists and science managers who are participating in a 7-week-long training entitled, as you see on screen, the Asia-Europe Training on Science and Technology Diplomacy. But we're also delighted that part of this training, we have these open webinars where we're inviting you as public attendees to listen in and learn more about this emerging field. So through these sessions, we aim to help participants and attendees such as yourself to familiarize yourself with key concepts related to science diplomacy, including its definitions and different sub-themes, and explore examples of how science diplomacy is practiced in Asia and Europe. And today's session, the fourth of our 5th-part series, will focus in on ways in which individual values, life experiences, and unconscious biases help shape our perceptions and the way we interact in this field of science diplomacy. And we'll hear from experts how we can navigate this landscape and in a way that we are conscious of our own values, personal biases, and the worldviews that shape us. So a little bit about the previous sessions. We've previously explored science for diplomacy, science impacting diplomacy, diplomacy impacting science, and as of last week, also tech diplomacy. So if you're interested in these sessions and you didn't catch them live, you can watch all of the recordings on our website, and we'll have a little QR code for you to scan towards the end as well, where you can have direct access, but otherwise you can navigate yourself on our website for this. Our training in this webinar series is organized by the Asia-Europe Foundation and our education department here, but it wouldn't be possible without our partners and supporters. So we're very pleased to be working with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs Denmark and the Central European Scientific Society of Innovation and Technology, or CESIT for short, as our partners, and glad to have the support of notable organizations and institutions in Asia and Europe, such as the Institute of International Science, Diplomacy and Sustainability at UCSI University in Malaysia, the Geneva Science and Diplomacy Anticipator, or GESTA, in Switzerland, the National Innovation Agency of Indonesia, the International Network for Governmental Science Advice, INSA, and specifically their ASA chapter. And then, of course, last but not least, the regional focal point for Asia and the Pacific of the International Science Council. So I invite you to read up more about these organizations as they do great work within this field, and we can only cover so much within this training and these webinars. So whilst this is a webinar, we encourage you to interact. You will see on your screen there's a little toolbar for you to ask questions using the Q&A function. So I encourage you to do so during today's session, both during the presentations and, of course, throughout, as our moderator will help bring this forward when suitable. And you also can use the chat function to introduce yourself. So even though you won't be able to see each other, you can write a short introduction and perhaps share each other's LinkedIn to connect beyond the scope of this webinar. So with that short introduction, I would like to waste no more time and already hand over the floor to our moderator for today's session from our own education department, our director, Ms. Reka Tosha, who will moderate and will also introduce our speakers for today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Linnea. Very good morning to all of you logging in from Europe, and good evening, good afternoon, all of you logging in from Asia. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I'm really excited to discuss with our distinguished speakers a new angle of science diplomacy, how values, biases, and worldviews influence science diplomacy, and how can we build more intercultural awareness. So let me introduce them and invite them also to join me on this floor virtually. First up, Dr. Lea Buendia, who is the Undersecretary for Research and Development at the Department of Science and Technology in the Philippines. She will be sharing her experience on values and worldviews from a senior government official's point of view. She's the perfect speaker to talk about this because she has immense experience in the field. And since 2016, she has been leading the national efforts of the Philippines in establishing strong bilateral science technology innovation partnerships globally, including with many European and Asian countries. But next to her diplomatic role as government official, she's also very dedicated to build multilateral relationships. So she was elected as vice chair for Asia Pacific at the UN Commission on Science and Technology for Development just recently last year, where she's representing the Philippines in STI policy. So thank you so much, Dr. Buendia, for accepting our invitation and joining us today, despite your busy schedule. We're happy to have you here. So she will be our first speaker today, but before I give her the floor, let me also introduce our other distinguished speakers. Second up, we will have Dr. Jean-Christophe Maudet joining us. I will just address him JC as short with his kind permission. He's an associate professor of science diplomacy at the University College London at the Department of Science, Technology, Engineering and Public Policy. So JC will be the perfect speaker to represent and bring in the voice of academia today. He has immense experience. Just to mention two examples, he was a research scholar at the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the well-known AAAS that we talked about so much in the previous two webinars. They are the ones who co-developed the definition, the old one and the new one, of science diplomacy with the Royal Academy together. And he was also the director at the Science Diplomacy Center at Tufts University in Boston. But beside being an academic, JC is also a scientist himself. So he has a PhD in astrophysics and has worked both on the European Space Agency and the NASA satellite missions and project officer with International Astronomical Union, focusing on scientific development issues. And if this was not enough, JC is also an active member of major multilateral dialogue platforms. He just served recently as the co-chair of the European Union Science Diplomacy Working Group. He was focusing on capacity building and liaising with many stakeholders who are providing similar training as we are piloting in this webinar series and the Asia-Europe Training on Science Diplomacy. And now he's currently also the co-chair of the Science Diplomacy Advisory Group of the International Science Council. So in summary, he comes with decades of experience, mainly from academic and scientific perspective, but he has been liaising with so many stakeholders in science diplomacy that he's the perfect speaker to share his experience with us, how personal, institutional, and national point of views, values, and biases play into this field. And last but not least, my great pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Lilis Muliani, who will share her experience from a young researcher's perspective. So Lilis is currently working at the National Research and Innovation Agency, BRIN in short, in Indonesia. And as you know, BRIN is one of our esteemed supporting partner in this training and the webinar series. Lilis is focusing her research on land law and agriculture studies, human rights, and legal methodology, as she also has a degree in law. But besides being a young researcher herself, she's in the best position to share more about the values, the changing values, the worldviews of the younger generation with us, because she's also the president of the Indonesian Young Academy of Sciences. She was elected last year, and since then she started to develop a series of activities and dialogues on addressing the intersection of science, society, and policy, which is also very useful for her other role, and because she's also giving advice to the International Science Council, as she's the member of the advisory board for the Asia Pacific Focal Point. So lovely to have you with us here, Liz, today. So these were the quick introductions to our speakers. And in the next half an hour, and I will invite each of them one by one to deliver quick lightning talks. So first, the floor would go to Undersecretary Buendia. So I would like to ask you to join me on the screen, and we will be happy to sharing your slides. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Rekka, and good day, everyone. First, I wish to express my sincere thanks for this kind invitation. I see quite a young group this afternoon and this morning as we further navigate the practice of science diplomacy in our current world order. I was introduced earlier. I am Leia, and the Undersecretary for Research and Development of the Philippines Department of Science and Technology. And today we will explore how values, biases, and worldviews shape the way we engage in international scientific cooperation. Can I have my next slide? In an era defined by interconnected challenges, climate change, pandemic, food insecurity, technological disruption, science diplomacy has become one of our most powerful tools for collective progress. Yet, science, no matter how advanced, does not operate in a vacuum. It is actually shaped by people, perspectives, and the cultural context in which knowledge is produced and applied. For science diplomacy to truly succeed, we must therefore embrace intercultural awareness as both a skill and a mindset. And so through my brief presentation, I hope that you will be able to get two things. First is to recognize how personal values, biases, and worldviews influence interactions in international scientific collaboration. And second, demonstrate an increased awareness of cultural differences that impact science diplomacy and cooperation. Next slide, please. Intercultural awareness helps us understand not only what science can achieve, but how we can work together to achieve it. Our diverse scientific communities bring distinct ways of thinking, communicating, and problem solving. These differences are not barriers. They are assets that enrich our collective intelligence. When we listen deeply, communicate respectfully, and approach collaboration with humility, we create the conditions for trust. And trust is the foundation upon which lasting diplomatic partnerships are built. Intercultural awareness allows us to represent the country with empathy and professionalism while also advancing our science, technology, innovation priorities. Next slide. Through intercultural awareness, our scientists and diplomats become bridges between nations. Shown in this map is the current international partnerships that DOST have as of date. At a glance, it can be easily seen that DOST has been engaging with a multitude of international partners in different areas of STI, and in so doing, we also get to interact in a various multicultural setting. We learn to translate scientific insights into shared understanding, to navigate political sensitivities with empathy, and to foster dialogue even when perspectives diverge. In so doing, we transform cultural diversity into scientific strength and diplomatic opportunity. Next slide. Intercultural awareness does not happen automatically. It actually requires intentional effort by training that values cultural literacy, exchanges that expose researchers to new environments, policies that prioritize inclusive collaboration, and leadership that recognizes diversity as a strategic advantage. Next slide. Let's connect these ideas to our work in DOST and the way we engage with our international partners. When we collaborate with Japan, for example, we often observe their structured and highly detailed-oriented approach. This reflects their deep cultural value for precision, thorough planning, and respect for established processes. In our engagements, we adopt by being meticulous with documentation, providing clear timelines, and ensuring that every step is well defined. This not only strengthens cooperation, but also shows cultural respect. With our partners, on the other hand, from the United States, our interactions tend to be more direct and open, yet still grounded in a professionalism. They value clarity, assertiveness, and relationship building. So we adjust by communicating confidently, being proactive during discussions, and maintaining openness in negotiations. Over time, we build strong working relationships based on trust and transparent communication. Next slide. We also had the opportunity working with what we called non-traditional partners like France, Iran, and Israel. France's deep appreciation for history and culture reflected in their work on biodiversity, anthropology, and archaeology, which extends to how they nurture global scientific talent. This aligns with DOST's talent mobility efforts, as collaborations with France create opportunities for Filipino researchers to engage in culturally rooted but globally relevant research. When we visited Iran for an S&T mission back in 2019, we have to prepare and brief our delegation on both the technical and cultural aspect of our trip. Women members of the delegation were asked to wear modest clothing and were asked to wear a scarf to cover their hair. With Israel, we noted their strong concept of collective community or kibbutz. Their engagements tend to be collaborative and innovative, driven by their strong startup culture and national needs. Partners are also persistent negotiators, reflecting their proactive approach to solutions. Next slide. In our ASEAN engagements, the approach shifts to one that emphasizes harmony, mutual respect, and consensus, the core of the ASEAN way. In these interactions, we adopt by being patient, ensuring all voices are heard, and working toward collective agreement, which strengthens our role in regional cooperation. These examples show how culturally diverse our engagements are and how important it is for us to remain flexible, whether we are working with partners who value structure, openness, consensus, or innovation. Our ability to read and adapt to different communication styles makes collaboration smoother and more effective. It also reinforces the role of DOST as a respectful and agile partner in international cooperation. Next slide. Science diplomacy is not just about sharing knowledge. It's about building mutual trust through mutual understanding to achieve our common goals and avoid misunderstanding. The Philippines fosters this through joint research projects where scientists collaborate across cultures and gain mutual appreciation. On the other hand, DOST's interactions with the United Nations bring together partners from diverse cultural and diplomatic backgrounds, requiring us to be mindful of tone, language, and protocol. Whether crafting statements, using collective and diplomatic phrasing, or navigating multi-country discussions, we adopt our communication to uphold respect and neutrality. By treating all partners equally, these collaborations strengthen trust and lead to ongoing scientific partnerships. In these partnerships, both countries, whether developed or developing, participate on equal footing. In our experience, this approach has been highly effective to nurture collaborative trust that leads to significant scientific partnership. Next slide, please. Let's pause for a brief reflection. Think of one personal value that guides how you work with others. It may be respect, efficiency, or collaboration. Now, Imagine working with a partner who holds a different value, say frankness or directness instead of diplomacy. How would that affect your interaction? Understanding these differences early can prevent conflict and promote mutual respect. Next slide, please. As we look ahead, remember that the future of science diplomacy will depend on our ability to work across borders, disciplines, and cultures. Let us embrace the mindset that every culture contributes a piece to the global scientific puzzle, and that only by respecting and integrating these pieces can we create knowledge that is impactful, ethical, and universally relevant. In nurturing intercultural awareness, we are not only strengthening scientific cooperation, we are strengthening humanity's capacity to face challenges together. Thank you, and let's continue to build bridges through science and mutual respect.
Thank you so much, Dr. Buendia, for this fantastic introduction to the topic. I particularly appreciate how you mentioned that diversity in itself doesn't create value, it requires effort and requires leadership policies and practices to make it work for everyone, which is something which is in our motto here at the Asia Europe Foundation, so can absolutely relate to that. And thank you so much for sharing so many practical examples from your work, how you work with the different countries and what are the different cultural considerations that you have when engaging with them. I'm sure it triggered some thoughts and reflections in our audience and the participants today as well. So I encourage you to start putting your questions and comments in the Q&A function. Before we go to the next speaker, I would like to follow up with one quick question on Undersecretary Buendia's presentation. Also, just asking you to share a bit more insights on your work and your experience from the last decade when you were already working very closely with countries from Europe, Southeast Asia, and Asia. My question would be, I would like to interested to know whether you noticed any differences in values or worldviews in how European countries approach science diplomacy. Perhaps compared to the Philippines or compared to Asia. I know it's very difficult to talk about Asia as a whole because there are so many countries, subsets, and alignments. But if you could share a few observations, a few examples, perhaps, how does differences between Asia and Europe manifest in your work?
Thank you very much. You know, when you're Asian, you always go around the bush. You don't want to hurt the feelings of others. Unlike when we talk with the Europeans, with the Western, it's straightforward. We can be frank with each other and yet they understand. So there are certain uniqueness of these two different regions where one prioritizes processes, formal agreements, long-term programmatic planning, and their emphasis on precision, documentation, and institutional continuity, which shapes collaboration like our collaboration with the UK, which thrives on very clear frameworks and predictable cycles of cooperation. So we follow their cycles. At the same time, we hope that our cycles could be flexible enough to adjust also to their cycles. So in Asia, approaches are more relational, more on the relationship, and more on culturally grounded activities. So our work with partners like Korea and Japan reflects their values of very orderly and planning and respect for authority. So this is evident in both our bilateral projects and our regional mechanisms like our eAsia and our eAsia joint research projects. With ASEAN, this is also different because we need consensus. So you have to really put in more patience in doing negotiation, because otherwise, once that only one country or one member state declines, the negotiation will not push through. So you have to be very patient. You should know where they stand, their backgrounds, and all of these things. So likewise, we respect religion as well in ASEAN. When it's time for prayer, if they are Muslim brothers, then we have to cut off the negotiation and respect their prayer time. For food, they should be given halal food. So there are two sides in the table. One will be for halal, one for the traditional food. So these are just examples of how we do our negotiations, because in negotiations, there's always consideration of the other party. So we shift our works and be flexible enough, but at the same time, not compromising our own priorities. At the DOST, we experience different styles and different mechanisms of communicating, but at the same time, we make sure that what we wanted will also be known to the other party. So these are just some of them. We can share maybe more in the future presentations.
Thank you so much for sharing these additional examples. I think it's very good for us to understand how the very practical day-to-day things and the fine touches matter when it comes to building up the trust that you were talking about in your presentation, and the mutual understanding. These practical things matter a lot. Thank you so much for the contribution so far, but we will come back to you, of course, in the panel discussion round after having listened to the initial inputs of our other two speakers. So let me invite now Dr. JC to take the floor and also share his quick lightning round talk on the topic.
Thank you, Rekha. And it's a difficult act to come after the fantastic presentation from Dr. Buendia, who highlighted many of the very salient issues that we face in science diplomacy. And again, it's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon. Thank you for the very kind invitation. Quick correction, I was only an associate director at Tufts University, not a director, but I was involved in the development of a science diplomacy center there. So in the UK, we're gearing up towards the end of the term. It's very busy. I'm sorry I didn't have to put time to put together a PowerPoint, so I'll proceed with remarks. And I will also rely on my notes, so apologies in advance if you see me looking through notes on the screen. First, I have to say I have to commend ESA for dedicating a session to intercultural awareness for science diplomacy, in particular looking at values, biases, and worldviews. This is a relatively new topic in the field, actually, but that very much deserves attention. We can see that as at the upcoming European Union Science Diplomacy Conference, for example, that will take place in Denmark at the end of the year. For the first time, an entire session will be dedicated to ethics and values in science diplomacy. So, of course, as we've heard, like any other activity in diplomacy, culture is a factor that one needs to be equally aware of when engaging in science diplomacy. So many of you here today, I'm sure, are acutely aware of this, and many of these aspects derive from the same issues connected more broadly to diplomacy. So they can be connected to certain norms and values upheld by certain societies, and we've heard a little bit of the examples just earlier, their languages, their beliefs, their histories and places in the world in general. So if we talk about science diplomacy as a subset of diplomacy, it will be affected by very similar issues, although its specificity is indeed found in the particular domain of interest here, science. But what I would like to state up front, however, is that personally, I'd like to clearly note that values and cultures can coexist within a single country or a single entity. For me, everything is entangled, and we should not necessarily try to, simplify things, although sometimes it's helpful by packaging everyone in a same unit of culture because they reside in a particular country or region of the globe. And I think this is particularly true in the realm of science when there is such important global mobility. Of course, often driven by inequalities that may have been inherited by history, and particularly colonial history. In turn, that also triggers issues of post-colonialism, which have been pointed out in the realm of science and in science diplomacy by scholars like Dr. Andrei Poljak and others. So we can also take the view that science diplomacy is not uniquely the realm of state and that many other actors contribute to it, from international organizations, non-gov organizations, universities, scientists, or even tech multinationals. And there, the values and norms of these subgroups may not necessarily fully reflect the ones of their home states. So in a way, I think it's also about professional communities. And for example, we talk about scientific culture or diplomatic culture, for example. So being part of a professional community means that we may adhere to some norms that may be different than our own compatriots, for example. It's well known that, many, but not all scientists feel part of a transnational community, which transcends borders in its values. And we can see that in the original framework of the AAAS Royal Society in 2010, which noted the component of science for diplomacy, which partly rests on the fact that science can indeed help to bridge diplomatic differences in other areas. And one of the famous examples is the thawing of the US-Cuba, for example, relationship under the Obama administration, which was spearheaded through scientific collaboration in medicine. I want to also note that even within a single professional community, such as the scientific community here, scientists can have different disciplinary backgrounds, which can also shape values and norms. It's well known in the community that there's a bit of a divide, unfortunately, between social scientists and natural scientists. And that's reflected in the fact that until 2018, these two scientific communities had two distinct organizations that represented them until they merged into the International Science Council. But nonetheless, if we look at scientists in general, they do tend to believe that they serve a purpose that goes beyond the national one. And that's also why in the field of science diplomacy, we've seen a lot of interest and enthusiasm by scientists that may portray it as a silver bullet or a potential solution to diplomatic problems that we see in the world today. Others in the community have actually pushed back on this vision that is tainted by what they called rosy lenses, as one scholar puts it, Dr. Tim Flink. So we see a lot of enthusiasm for science diplomacy coming from the scientific community because of these kinds of values that are upheld. Less so from the diplomatic community, although I don't want to bias anything in terms of the way that diplomats think. But it could be something coming from the background or remit of many of the diplomats, or maybe it's also because diplomats are much more aware of their realities on the ground, and hence the limitations that one can face when engaging in diplomacy and science diplomacy. And if we extend to policymakers or foreign policy issues, we can see these frictions at play in maybe the famous adage that you may know of the European Union when it comes to scientific cooperation, where it states that it needs to be as open as possible, but as closed as necessary. So I think this embedded duality really exemplifies the two ends of the spectrum here, where the first one would be taken up maybe by the scientific community more, and the second more by the foreign policy and security community, for example. So now it is, of course, true that countries have their own scientific and diplomatic cultures, which can affect the way that their science diplomacy is deployed. We've had some scholarly research done around this. So, for example, one author, Dr. Olga Krasniak, actually compared the different styles of science diplomacy of various countries. She looked, for example, at how China's state-centered style reflects its foreign policy objectives of controlled global engagement, the way that it's shaped by its centralized political structure and distinct cultural context, the way that it's also hard to really understand or see clearly the objectives of China in science diplomacy, as it doesn't necessarily advertise them. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, we can see, in terms of, say, advertising objectives, we can see the UK or the US, where, for example, the UK explicitly states that its objectives are around enhancing prosperity, strengthening foreign policy influence through science and innovation. You can even see, I was told that even on the website of the UK Embassy to France, one can read black and white that the objective is to influence French science technology policy decisions. So this is something that's very clearly written. And some countries put their emphasis on a science diplomacy strategy on different things. It could be from science to technology to innovation. For example, Brazil or the Netherlands or Switzerland are quite heavy on innovation diplomacy. So that based out of their own context and their own strategy. So that varies across countries. Some scholars have looked at differences, of course, between the global north and the global south, obviously generalizing, but one can see that the global north tends to use its scientific base and strength to project soft power and seek influence, where the global south typically uses science diplomacy in a way to build up its scientific capacities. And in a post-colonial context, to try to foster more South-South cooperation while trying to rebalance North-South ones, for example. So talking also about a same unit, same country, and we saw the example of the US earlier. I've spent quite some time in the US myself, and I also saw differences within the same culture, and we're very much aware of those right now in terms of how it's turned out politically at the moment. But I can tell you that, for example, when the US transitioned from the Obama administration to the first Trump administration, two colleagues of mine, two science diplomats, had two very different reactions. One chose to leave the State Department based on a moral stance towards the Trump's policies around climate change, and the other one chose to stay within the administration to help bridge the gap between the new national foreign policies and what is international needed to address climate change, for example. So this tells us that values can change within the same national community of science diplomats themselves, despite very similar cultural characteristics. So I just wouldn't want us to lose sight of that. So to summarize, I would say that there's clearly a need for intercultural awareness in general in science diplomacy for several reasons. Two of them, one being culture and context, obviously plays a role in shaping diplomacy at large. Second, culture and history also shapes the way a nation develops its science, which then has repercussions in the way that countries implement their science diplomacy. But all of this needs to be tempered by the fact that there are many other factors that influence the way that science diplomacy takes place, particularly in the way that it propagates through its actual actors, the science diplomats themselves, whose scientific culture, disciplinary backgrounds, and personal values also greatly shape the way that science diplomacy is rolled out. So I'll stop here and thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Professor JC. It was really, really nice how you explained to us how everything is entangled. And when we talk about cultural influences and cultural awareness in science diplomacy, that can be interpreted in many different ways. There are the country levels, but we shouldn't assume that country is united. There are different communities within the country, like government, NGO, civil society, scientists who might hold different value systems. Then we can also think about the supranational level. You mentioned the example of the EU from Professor Buendia's presentation. We already heard about the ASEAN as a supranational entity who also has its own values and promotes them through the member states. And also thank you for giving us examples on the national styles, how science diplomacy is employed and why awareness is needed. So just a quick follow-up question, if I may. So through your work, you came across and worked with most of these communities, of course, scientists, but also governments, diplomats, and politicians as well. And in this webinar, we talk about values and biases as well. So maybe if you can touch up on the bias part, like what did you observe? What are the most common biases that, for example, the academic community has towards the other groups when they engage with them in science diplomacy?
Thank you, Rika. Well, we all have our biases, right? So there's many biases at work, obviously. I think when it comes to academics, scientists, I mean, I think I partly addressed this in my initial remarks, but meaning that there are different types of scientists. Of course, we said natural, social scientists, and so on, and in different places with different cultural values and so on. I think another one is that there are different types of also scientists in terms of the milieu in which they operate. So it could be some scientists are directly contributing towards the national interest, whether commercial or military, for example, whereas there are some that focus only on global challenges and blue sky research, for example. So I think we just have to also say that the views of the scientists or the academics will vary quite a bit depending on which kind of science they do or their own context in which they do the science. That said, I think what I've mostly seen is that from the academic community at large, there's quite a bit of misunderstanding of what diplomats do and why, as well as the greater context within which science operates either nationally or internationally. So oddly, there's a lot of what I would say reductionism or oversimplification that occurs when scientists think about these groups that you said. When you talk about could be politicians or foreign policy professionals or diplomats and so on, and the actions of these communities. Of course, the reverse is true, right? But we do have this bias of the academic community not exactly understanding these things, and it causes friction for many reasons. But maybe also I can give you a quick example. So I had a friend and colleague from Spain who was a science counselor at the Spanish embassy in the US, and the Spanish colleagues put out a piece talking about the scientific diaspora and the way that Spanish scientific diaspora in the US and the way that it could be also the face of public diplomacy of Spain and being very proud of their researchers successful in the US, but also a way for Spain to leverage that scientific diaspora. And there was a lot of pushback from the Spanish academic community that felt actually instrumentalized and that said that science shouldn't be touched by tainted by national goals or priorities, and that they should not be considered as an instrument of state, but actually scientists and scientists only. So there's a lot of maybe misunderstanding about the action and a lot of pushback against a potential politicization or instrumentalization of science. So I see that a lot, and I think the fear of instrumentalization is something that I think, on the contrary, should be overcome, and so that we can actually engage with politics and diplomacy, because that's what's needed right now. So I think we should put that fear aside and engage, because what we don't know, we fear, and when we know, we start to do things better. So anyway, I'll stop it here and I'll wait for the questions. Thank you for the question.
Thank you so much. That's very interesting. Thank you for sharing this real life example, which shows that there's a lot of enthusiasm, but it comes with the limitations and fear of how it's being used. Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. Then let me invite our third speaker today, Dr. Lilis Muliani, representing the youth community in science diplomacy. Also, just like our audience today, many early career researchers, government officials, and diplomats. So let's see what are your key messages to them, Lilis. The floor is yours.
All right, thank you very much, Reka, and Asia Europe Foundation for this very important session on building intercultural awareness for science diplomacy. And I think it's a really important skill as well for young researchers to understand who they are working with. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lilis from Indonesia. I'm excited to be here. To be able to share my experience or my 2 cents based on Indonesian Young Academy of Science engagement with science and inclusivity topic, as well as our engagement with the global connection through International Science Council and Global Young Academy. I would like to share my, right. Can you see the PowerPoint?
Yes, perfect.
All right, great. So this will be my topic for today, this afternoon. So firstly, I would like for everyone, because I have prepared a question, and I would appreciate if everyone who participate in this session, if you can answer the question in the chat to see your valuable perspective on what is scientific authority. So what is the first thing that comes to your mind when we talk about scientific authority? Okay, I see there's some answer: regulations, policy, governance, gatekeeping, power. Oh, wow, that's very interesting. Thank you very much. We still wait for your answer for later discussion as well. But this also relates to Professor GSC explanation about the system and the structure as well, yeah? Because the values that we had, sometimes we cannot separate it from the context, from the system. So for the context of this talk, I would like to discuss there is a growing tension between what early career or early and mid-career researchers or young researchers, what they want to achieve and what the system around them allow. So we, in many countries, including Indonesia, and I also think it's also a similar situation faced by our colleagues in Australia, for example. There are some bureaucracy and bureaucratizations of science, and it's really limiting the academic freedom that most of the young researchers would like to aspire. And there's also an issue of career pathway between young researchers and intergenerational competition. So there are so many young researcher, early and mid-career, beginning to work at the university or the academic institution or research institutions, while the formation or the positions of the higher career is very limited, because there are seniors still posting in that positions. And there are also the paradox between the institutional or like a country purpose or objective on the short-term profit-oriented innovation outputs. This really happens, for example, in Indonesia, with the need on nurturing talents, especially for the young researchers. And of course, like our 2 previous speakers has also mentioned, the biases also exist, and there are quite a large gap between the seniors and the younger generation of researchers, which creates an intergenerational bias. So, for example, a lot of young researchers also have this difficulty on the career system that is built on the academic system. And there are also some assumptions who actually built or developed this system. And then we also see a shift of values and priorities toward a stronger focus on equity and collaboration with communities among the young researchers. We also see increased public engagement from young scientists using the social media, which also put the conventional outputs such as publication or research and technology in innovation with what the young scientists or young researchers want to present to the public, the content or the output. And a lot of young scientists also believe that sharing science is also sharing the life of a scientist. So it's not, a scientist is not a very reserved or close community, but it begins to open themselves, yeah. I mean, individually and also as a community of scientists. And so what has changed? I mean, there are some traditional values where the focus of science diplomacy has shifted within the period of our seniors with the young researchers. For example, on the national interest or soft power, with the goal or rationale is to use scientific prestige and capacity. For example, in the nuclear council in France, for example, as a tool to improve nations' diplomatic standing and foreign policy objective. So it's like a science for diplomacy, where there is an implied bias or limitation where the state-centric bias appears here, which prioritize national reputation over collective global well-being. And there's also exclusivity or strategic competition, diplomacy for science, which focusing on protecting national technological sovereignty and securing access to foreign science and technology talent and resources to gain economic or security advantage. So there is a competition bias in this particular context, which creates barriers to knowledge sharings and foster distrust. And there is also value on expert-driven advice, where we actually believe science provides neutral, objective evidence to inform foreign policy. And trust is placed in established and senior experts, not the young ones. So there is an intergenerational bias, although sometimes it's not really visible, that can lead to paternalistic communication styles and the dismissals of younger or non-traditional expertise. Another traditional values is institutional hierarchy, which focus on the government-to-government diplomacy and between established and formal institutional collaborations. Meanwhile, there is limitation for this institutional bias because it excludes non-state actors, NGOs, and community-based research efforts, including independent researchers and particularly these parties from the Global South. So based on these traditional values, what is actually shifted among the younger generation of researchers? There are at least 4 emerging values. The first one is global commons or social impacts, which prioritize science directly to solve transnational problems such as climate, health, sustainable development goals, in treating knowledge as a global public good, where there is a shift between national interest to global stewardship. And the second emerging values is equity and inclusion, where there is the goal or the rationale is to actively work to dismantle neo-colonial remnants and asymmetrical research relationship, which meant that equitable sharing of data, resources, and capacity building for the Global South. So there is a shift from exclusivity to open science and justice in these particular values. The next emerging values is reflexivity and engagement, where scientists must be reflexive about their own culture and institutional biases, acknowledging that their expertise is not value neutral. They must actively engage with the society and policy at all levels. So there is a shift from paternalistic expert advice to democratic dialogue and mutual learning. And the last emerging values that we can observe is the non-traditional actors, which promote track to diplomacy with informal academic or civil society networks, and multi-stakeholders approaches, giving a stronger voice to NGOs, non-government organizations, youth groups, independent research bodies, and so on and so forth. So there is a shift from institutional hierarchy to network boundaries spanning collaborations. And so in our particular engagement or interaction with the within the International Science Council, the global young academies, and early and mid-career researchers in several countries, for example. This distinction is critical for this workshop, actually. While young scientists worldwide share a drive for impacts, however, their starting points, their resource realities, and motivations differ profoundly by locations. So I use the interchangeably between the global north terms with the high income countries used in OECD, for example, and the global south or the low middle income countries, young researchers, to differentiate between these two. Of course, this doesn't really, some realities is not specific to this observation. I would like to invite the participants to also share their experience, whether our observation is in this table is accurate, or maybe we need to analyze more aspect or more perspective. So the key challenge, for example, in the motivation for science, for research and innovation, there is differences between the two groups, the global north and the global south, between the frontier versus frugal innovation, whereas the global north researchers, often driven by frontier science, pushing the boundaries of what is theoretically possible, such as the quantum computing, deep space explorations. So they value novelty and are often rewarded for high-tech and resource-intensive innovation. Meanwhile, their colleagues from the global south are often driven by endemic innovation, which tries to solve immediate and life or death challenges with limited resources, such as low-cost water filtration, drought-resistant crops, which means that they value more on relevance and resilience. And the implication for the diplomacy, the science diplomacy in this particular, is that in a negotiation, the scientists or researchers from the global north might propose a high-tech, expensive solution to a global problem, while the southern scientists might argue for a low-tech, scalable, and locally maintainable solutions. And the second one is about the visibility and recognition. So there is a structural issues on invisibility versus hypervisibility between the young researchers from the global north and the global south. for the global north, there is a struggle with the young researchers to publish or perish, where the culture with high impact journals, so they are highly visible in the global literatures, for may lack on the ground reality check. Meanwhile, their colleagues from the South struggles with epistemic exclusion. They often do the heavy lifting of fieldwork and data collection, but are frequently relegated to middle author or maybe last author's status, or just acknowledged in the footnotes or the acknowledgement part in the papers led by their northern colleagues. So the southern younger researchers are fight to be seen as intellectual architects, not just data collectors. The implication for the science diplomacy in this particular is that the young scientists or young researchers from the global south are increasingly using the demand for like decolonizations or like the epistemic justice to recognize the indigenous and local knowledge systems as a part of valid science. And the next one is the attitude to data openness and open science. Mostly the young researchers from the global north generally champion open science, such as open data, open access as moral imperative for transparency and speed. They operate from a position of abundance where sharing data doesn't threaten their career survival. It's really different with the young researchers from the South, which often view open science with caution. They fear about data extractivism or biopiracy, where the colleague from other high-income researchers, for example, mine data from the South, publish papers in expensive journals and patent results, leaving the young researchers from the South with no credit or no access to benefit. So the science diplomacy implication for this is that most young researchers from the southern part will demand benefit science sharing mechanism and IP protection before agreeing to open data protocols. And this also impact in the institutional barriers because, for example, the state will strengthen the research permit, for example, for the foreign researchers, such as happening also in Indonesia. And the last but not least is about the mobility, how the young researchers in the global north and the global south saw mobility and career path. For researchers from the global north, they view mobility or moving abroad as a brain circulations, which is a temporary and career boosting adventure. Meanwhile, there are challenging situation for the global south researchers who face reality of brain drain. Leaving their countries often means never returning. So most of young researchers from the south take a higher degree in the global south or the high income countries and unable to return because there is a lack of infrastructure at home. So there are also a lot of systemic barriers that prevent them to return to their home countries. So of course, this is a part of discussion. Yeah, we can discuss all this situation, whether it is accurate happening also in your situation or not. So I think that will be my presentation to induce or to trigger discussion, and I would hand it back to Reka again. Thank you, Reka.
Thank you so much, Lilis, for this insightful presentation. Really enjoyed it. How you approached, we asked you to showcase another type of values as the intergenerational gap, how the young generation perceives values perhaps differently from the older one. And you brought us many, many lived experiences. So it was very insightful. I would like to thank you. And I would like to ask all of our panelists to join me on the screen. And then give a quick reflection on Lily's presentation, please, from your point of view, perhaps just one thing that stood out the most for you or that resonated best with you, where you would agree or perhaps disagree with Lily's. Let's start with Prof. JC.
Thank you, Rika, and thank you, Dr. Miliani. This was a lot of very salient points that you've packed into your presentation. So I don't exactly know where to start, but I would say that on your later point, I think for scientists, it's very important to understand, and science diplomats as well, it's very important to understand global north/global south dynamics and the geopolitics at large here. Particularly to avoid perpetuating systemic structures of power and inequalities, as you said, epistemic injustice and so on. I think for me, this translates very interestingly into science diplomacy actions, right? So you see the global north deploying actions to do brain gain, right, or attraction to try to get the best talent from everywhere, but that means a brain drain on the other side, right? So how do you reconcile also these issues where certain countries try to attract and some countries try to retain, and it's a bit of a zero-sum game here. So how do we look at the values or the ethical underpinning of these kinds of actions when we know that it perpetuates these sort of issues in the systems? It's not an easy thing to reconcile. So thank you very much for highlighting that.
Thank you so much, and a quick reflection from Dr. Buendia as well.
Thank you very much. I think while there is brain drain, because in the Philippines, you know very well, opportunities are coming once in a blue moon. I mean, very, very seldom do you get opportunities. So what we do is, okay, then you go for that green grass. But we have a program where we also attract these people who went to the global north, and we provide them incentives. I mean, we call it the Balik Scientist Program. Balik meaning to come back. So the Balik Scientist Program is we offer them incentives in order for them to help the Philippines through science, technology, and innovation. So help them, the country develop. And at the same time, it's not even maybe 1/3 of what they get there, but we tap on their patriotism, on the heart. That's why balik puso, meaning they come back to your heart. Balik scientist, meaning you come back as a scientist, and balik Pilipinas, meaning you come back to the Philippines. So because they are already established in their respective careers, now it's time to give back to the Philippines. So we have this program, and I think it's very effective because they have established their expertise. At the same time, they learn from that country, and now they're bringing back to the Philippines what they have learned. So for us, it's not really brain drain, but eventually we had some brain gain.
Thank you. Thank you for the reflections and explaining the approach of the Philippines, which is another but different another example with different outcomes than the one that JC shared with the Spanish diaspora diplomat in the US. Okay, I think it's time for us to take some questions from the Q&A functions as well, and I would like to start with one from Ik Supanuch. It's a very short question, but super interesting. What would be the top 3 measurable impacts if we are building intercultural awareness for scientists and diplomats? So we already talked a lot about why is it important to build intercultural awareness, but then how can we measure whether our actions were successful or not? I would like to invite each of you for a quick round of reflection, what would be your top 1 or 2 choices? How is it possible to measure intercultural awareness and competencies in science diplomacy? Whoever would like to start first.
Can you repeat your question? Sorry.
Yes, so it's important. We acknowledge the importance of building intercultural awareness for diplomats and scientists as well, but how can we measure it? How can we measure whether their actions, let it be a training course, or we can also talk about actions, like how can you at all build intercultural awareness, and how can you measure whether it was successful or not?
Well, for me, success is quite relative. Success to you may not be success to me, but at the same time, there are certain indicators where you measure success, and one of them may be if there are more joint activities between the two countries, it's a measure of success. Or if there are very impactful outcomes that were achieved by both countries, then it's also a measure of success. But sometimes there are much deeper measures of success. Like, for example, it's fulfilling to one person, to a scientist, it's fulfilling to help another or to transfer the technology. It's fulfilling to them. I cannot measure that fulfillment, but for me, it's part of their success as a scientist or as a researcher. So there are many aspects to measuring, but at the end of the day, both countries or both scientists would agree that they have made an impact.
Thank you so much for sharing from the government perspective. So basically, it's like an underlying condition to have any kind of agreement or output from negotiations. What do you think, Lilis and JC?
May I go first?
Yes.
Right. Okay. So I agree with Dr. Buendia. So there should be a successful collaboration. It means that the project itself is like a successful, and there are several follow-up projects and collaborations. So, but success in terms of this intercultural collaboration is also can be seen by the improved skill for the less advantaged partners. So there are like transfer of knowledge and transfer of skills from the more advantaged partners to the less one, and so there are equality and inclusivity in that particular terms. And also, I also agree that the science is not also, the impact is not also science for science, like the numbers of publication, but also how much the project can engage the community and the local voices. So they impact directly to the community, not only for the scientific community. So that's my point of view. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And what's your take on this, JC? How can we measure whether building intercultural awareness was successful or not?
Yeah, it's a very difficult question, and I think the two previous speakers have answered it already. But I think for me, I think I would say that things are successful when these factors of culture are no longer an issue or a barrier to our understanding and way of collaborating and achieving successful outcomes. And I think that when we talk about the two communities, for example, scientists and diplomats, I think it's very crucial that they can understand each other beyond also so their communities' biases, but also their intercultural biases, right, themselves. So these layers, I think that this can be, for example, Dr. Merlini was talking about training. I think this can be achieved partly through mock international negotiations on scientific issues, for example, where we can be confronted to these kinds of biases and perspectives, whether they're coming from discipline or professional communities or intercultural differences and so on, so that we can then measure the way that people felt before and then they felt afterwards, and then they can engage maybe later on in the real world, being aware of these kinds of biases already, because that's when you're not aware that things then unfold in an unsuccessful manner, I would say. Although it's not exclusively, it could be also unsuccessful for different reasons, but at least being aware of these biases is to me critically important for successful outcomes.
Very interesting. Thank you so much. Let us take more questions from the Q&A function. And let me address this one to Dr. Buendia. So we have Paulo Samoza from the Philippines, actually, saying that, all right, we recognize that culture, norms, and behavior play a significant role in shaping state relations. But to what extent do you think that actually culture should influence a state's capacity or capability to pursue technological advancements in a way that fosters collaboration rather than competition with other countries? So yes, we recognize there is an impact, but to what extent is it justifiable to have an impact?
Well, you cannot really move away competition because science should be a trigger for economic development. So there will really be competition. But there are also things that you will have to consider. And one of them is the cultural differences. In order for you to be able to, like, if you want to transfer, if you want to collaborate, if you want to transfer your technology, there are some instances that you really need to consider cultural differences. Otherwise, if you will not consider cultural differences, they may not even be collaborating with you. Because they value more their cultural background rather than collaborating, because at their own stage they can do it on their own, but because there is collaboration, there's the opportunity for collaboration, then they will do it. But there are certain limits to collaboration.
Oh, very interesting. Thank you so much. And let me take another question from Clementine Vlak, who is from the Netherlands, but actually working for the Royal Society of Engineers. And let me address to JC. So she says in the UK, for example, diversity, equity, and inclusion are very important topics within the workspace. But working internationally, it can be sometimes difficult to approach this theme with partners without being paternalistic. So how would you approach discussions on biases with international partners and scientists?
Thank you for the question. That's a very tricky question, and it's true. I mean, we do have countries have their own societal issues and priorities, and then the way that it expresses itself. For example, here in the UK, it could be through embracing diversity, equity, and inclusion, and so on. I think sometimes these issues don't necessarily translate well in other countries' contexts. Here I would say I wouldn't really talk about the paternalistic aspect here of the question. I think that's slightly different in my understanding. I think it's just what I'm trying to highlight is the cultural context in which certain countries have values and want to address them, where maybe sometimes other countries don't have the same priorities and don't see the need to address these kinds of issues. So I think it's just a way of being, I think for me, it's being aware that what is in your context might not necessarily be relevant to someone else in another context. I don't exactly know the answer at how to approach it. I think it's just being aware that of the different priorities in societal contexts in which one operates. But this is more broadly than science, to be honest. This is in any kind of I guess relationship, international relationship that you would have to have this discussion. I think one has to be maybe voicing that this is important in your context, and then being transparent about this, not assuming that the other person can relate or understand the context. So maybe being transparent and explaining why that context matters to you. I think that's where I would leave it.
Thank you so much. Yes, so contextual awareness besides cultural awareness is very important when discussing sensitive issues or issues that not all countries would agree on or would have biases towards. Thank you so much. And then a quick question to Lilis as well. So Paolo is asking that how can global research collaborations be redesigned? So especially for young researchers from less developed countries or CLMICs, as he writes it in short, so that these young researchers are not treated as data collectors, or so they are really treated as equal intellectual contributors, in your opinion, Lilis?
Mm-hmm. So I think collaboration between young researchers at the global north and the south is actually materializing now, and they're increasing in terms of numbers, and they share similar problems, share similar vision. Like I said earlier, they share the values on the global justice, for example, or like global issues that needs to be resolved together. So with these new emerging shared values, it's one of footing that can help with these issues. And so we also see the growing numbers of young researchers from the South having a competence and skills similar or comparable to their colleagues from the global North. So I think there's no problem between the younger generations. So they usually they will need to co-design the project proposal. So they sit together to design the proposal, the project, and I think there is one skill that needs to be added for the scientists, which is empathy and caring. So they can, can grasp the differences and have the ability to handle that differences in a very careful way. So not to intervene too much, but also not to make some misunderstanding within the collaboration.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lilis. Very, very interesting.
Thank
you.
If I can add something to that.
Yes.
I think there's a global realization that youth can contribute a lot already, particularly to science, technology, and innovation. Like, for example, AI is really coming from the young minds of our scientists. And you cannot tell me that AI is for the old like me, no? But I think there are some capabilities already that have been developed from our young scientists. And there are a lot of programs that are open for our young scientists as well. There are a lot of like hackathons and all these kinds of programs that are open for our young scientists. What we can do really is maybe to harness these energies of the young scientists and young minds. Harness them, make them work for the good, and you will, one of these days, mentoring may be one of the very best approach to harnessing these energies of the young scientists. So we are providing these opportunities as a government official. We're providing opportunities for young researchers to come up with proposals and do their research and fund them. We are providing a lot of trainings and scholarships so that we can harness their potential. And at the end of the day, the Philippines, like for example, is maybe more of the younger generation than the older generation. So we have a lot of young people where we can put more investment so that at the end of the day, they can be the potential researchers and future leaders of the country. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for the wise words there, Dr. Buendia. And then that brings me to the final closing to the webinar today. I would like to invite all of our panelists just to share one thought with us. If our participants would just remember one thing from today's webinar, one key takeaway, what would be your advice? What is the thing that they should keep in mind? Let's start with the JCS. He needs to leave very soon.
Well, thank you, Rika, and I want to thank also my fellow panelists for amazing remarks. I think for me, the important bit is to understand that, of course, culture and context shape our interactions, but that there are also other factors that contribute to shaping the way that we engage and think. I mentioned a few already, but I think being aware of all of these is absolutely critical for us to make progress on science diplomacy challenges that we're facing. So I think these kinds of opportunities and training, reflexivity is extremely important to have in this space.
Thank you so much, JC. Yes, we encourage all of the participants to be reflective as well and try to embrace how does this come across in their own life and day-to-day activities. Okay, who would like to go next? Yes, Dr.
Maybe I can
Buendia.
go. Yeah, so science diplomacy actually reminds us that while there are borders and this may define nations, knowledge does not. Thank you.
That's a lovely, lovely closing message. Thank you so much. And Lilis.
Yeah, thank you. So as the science diplomats, whether we are researchers, diplomats working in the government or organizations, I think we need to enhance our skills with empathy and caring so that we can prevent any intercultural misunderstanding. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I would like to thank all of you and a big virtual round of applause. Thank you for joining us today, making time for this session. We learned a lot from you, very interesting contributions. And like JC said, there is not much research and knowledge available on this topic. So we will be taking up this challenge, and I encourage everyone in this call, if you're interested, to dig deeper in this topic. I think we opened many doors, opened many questions, also left some unanswered in the chat, and I'm very sorry about that, but I think each of those were very nice questions, which actually would deserve their own research, perhaps, so big ones. So thank you so much for being here and diving into this topic with us. And let me give back the floor to Linnea for closing.
Thank you very much, Rika. And again, thank you to our speakers for being with us here today, for your contributions. They're very insightful to listen into all of you and to see your presentations in the beginning as well. So to wrap things up today, I would like to just share a little bit more about what we have done and what we have ahead of us. So I mentioned in the beginning of today's session that we have already concluded with 3 webinars, now today with the 4th. So if you're interested in learning more about the topics that we've already explored, you can scan the QR code here on the screen or visit our website to watch the full recordings of the sessions. But we also have one more to go next week coming up, in which we will explore more professional lenses in related to science and technology diplomacy under the topic of Two Worlds, One Mission, how scientists and diplomats practice science diplomacy. So if you're interested in that, you can scan the QR code on the screen. You can also see two of our speakers that will be present next week to share their expertise with you all. So to our attendees, thank you for joining us today. We hope to see you next week. And to our participants on the wider training, we look forward to seeing you on Thursday to further explore the ways in which values, biases, and worldviews shapes the way that we interact with science diplomacy. Thank you all so much. If you're joining us from Europe, have a good rest of your day. If you're joining us from Asia, have a good rest of your evening. And we hope to see you next week.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Rika. Thank you.